I'd love to hear some commentary from you on these two verses, 13 and 14. It's a very interesting juxtaposition. Śrī Maharaj put these two next to each other.
I don't have the book right in front of me. Could you just remind me?
Right. Well, the verse 13 is the verse yasyātma-buddhiḥ kuṇape tri-dhātuke, and Śrī Maharaj's illumination is the mentality of considering mundane objects to be conscious elements. And then do you remember that verse, or do you want me to?
No, I know that verse. It's interesting that I don't know what the other verse was you were thinking, but just, I mean, what's interesting to me, just first thought in my mind that.
Yeah, the next, I'll tell you quickly.
Okay.
The next and the following verse, Śrī Maharaj has juxtaposed these two, is Arche Vishnu Sva-dhīḥ Gurushu, and Śrī Maharaj's illumination is the offensive mentality of considering worshipable, conscious divine forms to be mundane or subordinate to mundanity must be totally abandoned.
But what's the translation for that verse? Because the other verse I'm familiar with more.
This one, it's anyone who considers the worshipable deity to be stone, who considers the Vaishnava guru to be a mortal man, who considers a Vaishnava to be limited by the confines of, so it's, in other words, seeing what is spiritual as material. So these two verses, they're like talking about opposite.
Yeah. No, I know, I should grab my book because I'm confusing them. I thought I had them in my memory, but now that I'm hearing them, I'm like confusing them which one I was thinking of.
Yeah, no, I know you know the verse.
But
yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, just in general, the principle is the same on either side. You have spiritual things and you have mundane things, or you have another way to say it, you have the spiritual understanding of a thing and you have the mundane understanding of a thing. And so the contrast is the same on either, like one is saying, if you value mundane things and attribute spiritual value to them, that's wrong, that's undesirable. And if you view spiritual things and attribute mundane value to them, that's also.
Is it just me who's hearing? Is it just me who's hearing you not so well, or is it my connection? Is there anyone else?
I think it's your connection. Problem? I think it's your connection, Didi, because you were kind of chopping in and out, and then I hear Nrsingha perfectly. So.
Oh, so it's me, huh? Okay, okay, sorry. Carry on. I'll try and change my connection here.
You're sounding fine now, but yeah, Nrsingha sounds great.
Okay.
All right. I mean, just the way I've always understood those verses is like, you know, our current condition is that we don't have so much maybe direct awareness of spiritual things. Our direct experience in life is much more tangibly connected to what the scriptures define as mundane experience. So it's natural for us to be more attached or to have more value invested in those things of our tangible experience than things of our, you know, spiritual potential. And that's okay, you know, assuming that there is an awareness of a journey or a process to transition our values or our understanding gradually. We're coming from mundane experience. We're trying to become attached or aware of spiritual truth and that whole life that comes with that. So to keep those things in perspective and then try to, as we say, this theme came up last class I was there, yukta vairagya, adjusting things or relating the mundane things to the spiritual things in a way that's favorable. So I have my immediate life that's tangible, that I can't avoid or ignore, and I have my spiritual goals and ideals that I want to treat as valuable. So how do I adjust my current life in a way that will contribute to that? So that's the healthy version of what these verses are describing from the other side, from the inverted side, which is basically to reverse all of the factors. The mundane thing is more important, and the spiritual thing is, devalued or something. And I guess the sensitivity of these verses is that for someone who is in spiritual pursuit, like for someone who's in the world and doesn't care, then none of these things apply because they won't even be confronted with it. They're like, spiritual things don't exist and it's not important, end of story. My immediate life is all in all. But for those that are interested in spiritual pursuits, there's some awareness to this, that we're going to be in the midst of two sorts of experiences: our cultivating of spiritual ideals and values, and our immediate experiences of our just mundane life. And so the temptation may be there to remain attached to the things we're already attached to and kind of ignore the things that are distant in terms of, again, spiritual ideals, and then justify it some way, reorganize the values. And that's what this verse is that's what these verses are trying to address in some detail, that in the name of this, you can still be attached to this, and various versions of how the values can be inverted. The spiritual thing can come to serve the mundane can take precedence. So these are just various scenarios and examples of how to keep those priorities in proper relationship to each other, something like that.
Very nice, Nrsingha Prabhu. Unfortunately, my connection's really bad. I went in and out several times. I couldn't hear everything you said, but what I did hear was really nice. And so this one thing I wanted to mention was this 13, verse 13. You could describe that as a type of like idol worship, isn't it? Like appreciating and approaching in a superficial way, not understanding the real essence of what.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge of everything spiritual. Is like, if you think about, examples in Gaura Lila where, very subtle things were brought to the forefront. Like, I'm thinking Krishnadas Kaviraj writes that before writing Chaitanya Charitamrita, it was his brother, right? His brother was doing puja or something, and one of the associates of Nityananda came, and Krishnadas Kaviraj could observe by his brother's response or lack of response that he didn't regard the followers of Nityananda in the same way he did Mahaprabhu. Very subtle thing. And Krishnadas Kaviraj picked up on that and chastised his brother, and then left and went to Vrindavan. And then he said, Nityananda Prabhu was so pleased with me for chastising my brother that he came to me in a dream and gave me this inspiration to write Chaitanya Charitamrita. So the reason I'm saying that is because that's just an example of how subtle the hierarchy of spiritual values can get. His brother's a follower of a spiritual path, doing puja, regard, like so many things are similar. His brother has so many things right, but there's some other, because Nityananda is unconventional, because his followers are unconventional, because birth and caste and other sensibilities they're not known for that, maybe, then his brother had some reservation that they're not proper, like, because of this it's a lesser consideration, it's a mundane consideration, formalities, whatever. But because of that lesser consideration, his brother had reservation about giving regard. It's such a subtle thing. But it just highlights the importance of motive. It's like Krishnadas Kaviraj, while his brother is doing puja, he becomes angry and chastises him, because even though he's doing a spiritual practice, a spiritual act, and I'm relating it to the idea of idol worship, because what is proper worship or not proper worship? It comes back to ideals, or what is the values with which the worshiper is approaching. If they're worshiping Vishnu, he's completely spiritual, but if the motive is mundane, and if the understanding is mundane, then that's a form of idol worship. It's not that Vishnu is a false idol, but it means that that equation is not leading to spiritual, of course it can, there's Sukriti, that's a whole nother, like, progression is another factor, but sorry, I hope I'm not.
Well, what you're saying is related to, that verse in the beginning of Bhagavatam, Dharma Sanushthita Pumsam. Like, if all of your so-called religious activity is not leading to an increase in desire to hear Harikatha, Shama Eva Hi Kevalam. It's all worthless. It's all useless.
Right. And so that's the emphasis, and that's why, these, this chapter, and why Sharanagati and Prapanna, it's like, it's so special, because it's setting the bar, so to speak. It's like in the world of Vedic knowledge, every type of spiritual understanding is fully explored. Every type of yoga process is like extensively discussed. There's many things, and there's a certain point of view. Well, then the question arises, is it a free-for-all? Like, is any result as good as another, or is there actually some objective standard of higher value? Like, is there a higher, like, of all the things that the Vedas may provide, is there something that actually is the most valuable objectively? That question eventually arises, and then different schools of thought battle that out. and so what Bhagavatam is in a sense, we hear that's Vyasadev's version of his own work. In the Vedas, he described many things, and then at the end he qualified it, and he said, the point of view that I really wanted to get across was this one. And that's that Krishna consciousness is more valuable than everything else, and everything else I said was ultimately to lead you in that direction. So Bhagavatam sets like a standard, like a bar. This is the purpose of all Vedic knowledge. It has to come to some kind of accountability to this destination or this conclusion. And then within that, more specifically, Mahaprabhu and his line, they took that foundation of Bhagavatam and they again focused inside of there, more specific, what is best, what is higher, what is this and that. And so when we're saying what's favorable and what's unfavorable, that's such a broad, if you take it out of the context of Krishna consciousness, that just could mean anything. So why is it important in this context? Because Guru Maharaj is giving a standard, like setting a bar of what should be understood as favorable and unfavorable in the context of this defined goal, like, if that makes sense. Like as Krishna consciousness has been defined by Mahaprabhu, that's our specific goal. And because that's our specific goal, there's certain principles that come with that. And so considerations of favorable and unfavorable, they're all going to be, because things are on a spectrum. You could set the bar at many levels. This is okay, this is not okay. You could adjust that. But in Krishna consciousness, the bar is set at a certain level because that is where Krishna consciousness is understood properly or purely or fully. So those things have to be clarified. Mundane attachment and spiritual attachment are not on the same level. And how to adjust that, there's many levels of adjustment, but some type of adjustment and some type of journey has to be part of the plan. And that can accommodate many things. But anyway, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling now. So
oh, it's so beautiful to hear what you had to say. I have to admit, I don't always understand.
I know, well, that's the thing, and sometimes I know that's really what I get.
No, it's not. It's me. My IQ is lower than yours.
No, it's not, because I'm saying things that I think about. So I'm, in a sense, I'm in a long conversation with everyone is. We listen to ourselves all day. So it's like we go to talk to other people. Sometimes we don't know where to pick up, or because it's like I'm just picking up on wherever I'm. Your inner thread. So I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. I'm like, is this really just sound bizarre, or?
No, it all sounded really sound. I was thinking of there was a comment that Swami Maharaj Prabhu had made. He said, "I didn't always understand what my Guru Maharaj was saying, but I kept on hearing." I was thinking
I don't want it. This shouldn't go in that category.
Because when you speak, you just sound like it's so beautiful and eloquent and so substantial, and you feel like it's so connected with our gurus, So even if I don't fully understand, I feel like, something's really good.
Yeah, I guess in essence, what I would try to summarize is that I think the lesson from those verses is that we want to try to be aware of how we are culturing our sensibilities in life. What values and what things are we giving care and attention to? And we want to make an attempt to do that under the guidance and advice of those that have more spiritual awareness, and because that will help us deal with things in a way that we become able to also have that awareness. That's like the simplest, and the details of that are gonna change at different points in life. Money is gonna be pressing on my mind at different points in life, other things. So we're gonna be challenged in different ways, but through all that, we wanna keep our compass, so to speak. And that's just, I would say, what those verses are stressing the importance of, is to keep the compass of your spiritual ideals as you navigate so many other experiences that can help or hurt that cause, depending on how we manage it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nrsingha Prabhu. Lalita Madhav Prabhu, will you add something to this discussion?
To be Dandavad, sorry, I came late and I was a little bit spacing out as well. But in terms of I'm not even sure which verses we're actually talking about. Is it 13 and 14?
Yeah, 13 and 14. It's interesting, isn't it, how Śrī-Śrī Maharaj has juxtaposed these two things.
Yeah, weirdly, I've never noticed that before. I never noticed it. I don't think I have anything to add to what Nrsingha Prabhu was just saying. As much of that as I could have, as I understood. But yeah, just really just the juxtaposition of the two verses is obviously very significant. It's strange how I've read these verses many times together, but never really caught the sort of like, I don't know, there's a little bit of a it plays with you a little bit, doesn't it?
It's a nice example of how Srila Śrīla Maharaj has laid these verses out with such care, you know, like the order, like which verses, and then even the order of the verses, the placement, like he's put, you know, deep thought into that. So yeah, very interesting.
I have a quick question because I don't have the book in front of me. When those verses are quoted, are they from the same place? Are they like?
One just says Śrī-Śrī-Bhagavataḥ, and translated as the Supreme Personality, and the other is Śrī-Vyasa-Padanam, so Vyasadeva, which is interesting because both are from Bhagavatam, no?
Right, and I was thinking, because are they next to each other?
Yeah.
That's why I was confused earlier, because I was thinking of them as one verse, which confused me. I don't know why.
Are they next to each other in the Bhagavatam? I mean, that wouldn't take too much.
That's what I'm curious.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I doubt it.
The meter is completely different. I mean, so wouldn't that indicate? I don't think they're next to each other. I'm not. Are you sure that Arche Vishnu is in Bhagavatam? The first one I think is, but the second one is it? Are you sure?
I think it's from one Purana.
Yeah, I think it's from somewhere else. Yeah.
Where is it from?
From one Purana.
Purana. Yeah, that's what comes to my mind too. It's from a Purana.
A Purana.
Okay, I think because the meanings are so similar, I just had them in my mind as like that's one verse, I was confusing me earlier.
But they're also not so. I mean, they are ultimately underlying all of it, of course, but also not so similar, actually. Hey,
they're making the opposite points, right?
Making the opposite points, exactly. Yeah, making the. It's interesting. The sort of illuminating aphorism, or I mean, what do we call these things actually? Like the purport or Guru Maharaj's illuminations, or whatever you want to call them, the introductions to the jaḍe chid-buddhir varjanīyā, this jaḍe chid-buddhir. That's like the definition in a sense of like, at least according to Shankara, it's like the superimposition of the qualities of the subject onto that of the object. That's Maya.
Wait, can you say that again?
The superimposition of the qualities of the subject onto the object, that is Maya. You know, so to attribute, we would say to attribute consciousness to the body, right? To take that as a, you know, and thereby, you know, sort of like lose sight of the conscious subject behind all of that. That's the sort of fundamental sort of like move into Maya. Interestingly.
That's why I was thinking, because I said they're similar, but it's similar in the sense of like when people say the flip side of the same coin, similar. So they're saying the opposite thing, but they're saying the opposite thing about the same principle. So it's, but it's kind of like people in the world, they're attributing their spirit, their conscious living self to the body. The body is my real self, when actually the body is the mundane matter. And then they see the Murti and they think the Murti is matter. And the scriptures are saying, no, the Murti is chid, the Murti is conscious, and your body is matter. So it's basically like, there's a whole dichotomy where it's like you're seeing everything opposite. Like Maya sometimes mean that which is not. So it's like you just have everything reversed. The things of spiritual value, you treat them as mundane, and the things of mundane value, you treat them as worshipable. So this is the
but an interesting, I mean, like if you know, like the danger with perhaps I mean, of course, there's the whole thing about, you know, the lack of recognition of the devotee of the Lord, but you know, you could be, you know, like the flip side of the first verse could be not the second verse, actually. It could be more the plane of renunciation, where therefore I reject graven images. I reject, bodies of water. Right? There's not yet a conception of spiritual form, and like the sort of polar opposite side.
Yeah,
yeah.
Yes, go on. No, go on.
No, that's really it.
No, I was gonna say, but that is a very subtle difference but that's a very important distinction, because we know that sometimes when Guru Maharaj simplifies it all, he says there's three paths. There's karma, gyan, and bhakti, and ultimately karma and gyan are both antagonistic to bhakti in its purest form, and so both those are layers that will be, you know what I'm saying, like those. It includes the falsely spiritual version and the very mundane and the very and even the very renounced spiritual version, like the Mayavad that reject the Murti also for spiritual reasons, quote unquote. So that's
exactly. It's interesting though that, like, in terms of how would you, so we're talking about the person who who considers a graven image of earth. I mean, whether you consider the deity a graven image, but yet does not conceive of the worshipable position of a devotee of the Lord. That is not then a reference to, like, at first I was taking it as like honoring the deity, but not the devotee. But it's not that. It's not that, eh? It's not that.
Well, I think the way I understood that verse, like when I was in ISKCON and how Prabhupada explained it, was that the devotee is the one that makes all of these spiritual things like tangible. When you take out the devotee, then they become cultural forms, or they become other things. And so when someone values them and becomes very attached to them for those reasons, but doesn't value the role of the devotee, which is to actually connect those things to their higher spiritual purpose, it becomes something else. And so that's another, again, a subtle layer there, but that's how I remember Prabhupada kind of describing
that's like an interesting point there, because like, so something like, let's say, a Govardhan Shila or Shalagram Shila, is that not, I mean, surely an argument could be made for like that simply being spiritual in itself. A Govardhan Shila, that just is spiritual, irrespective of perspective. Is there not an argument to be made for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, but then it's like when we're talking about, it's like what topic is actually the criterion? Because if we're saying like what is spiritual or not, regardless of people's perception of it, that's one type of discussion that's also very meaningful. But there's another side, which is the discussion of how do we get the people to have that spiritual perception of that thing, and then all these factors matter. Because
like another example is, can prasadam ever be, okay, can prasadam ever be just food? If someone doesn't have the right conception, is it just food ever? Or is it always prasadam?
My understanding is that it's not ever just food, but it comes back to that meeting point of the spiritual substance with it being appreciated or received properly by the soul. Because how they receive it is going to factor in largely into how much of its actual value is or at least like maybe because we have the concept of super,
like how much we can access. It's there, but how much can we access?
Or even taking it more extreme, is Guru Dev in any situation ever a man, just a man? You could think, no, well, you might not ever see him, but he's still there, I mean, and you're in some way, he's getting through to you, however covered you might be.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, please.
What was coming up for me in this particular, I mean, every down the way, many different things coming, but in this one, I'll just chime in what was coming to me. everything is inherently spiritual, and we're just filtering that. And of course, some things are more closely representing that. I'm going to probably stumble over my words on this, but is Gurudeva ever just a man? Never. But we might filter out his spiritual qualities so that they bounce right off of us because we're filtering. So it's our subjective filter that would then reduce him to a quote man, but it's actually our perception. He's always Gurudev. The Murti is always eternal, and the Murti only appears in a stone form because of our filters. Like he's actually Krishna. The Murti is always Krishna, but we're filtering it down through our Mayic senses. Oh, he's stone. Oh, that's convenient. He's the deity. But this whole world's an illusion. So that whole transaction of stone or man is happening in the world of misconception. I don't know if that's making sense. Like it's
I think that makes complete sense, and it brings to mind actually, of course, really what we're dealing with here as well. What you're saying is, you know, what's that analogy of like there's the sun and then there's the, you know, there's the clouds in front of this, but the sun is always there shining resplendently. I mean, that itself is just the definition of Maya, which interestingly then in terms of the illuminating sort of like Sanskrit, you know, passage here, the jaḍe chid-buddhir varjanīyā is like, it's just the definition of Maya, essentially, going back to that point. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, because it's like, there's one thing I like to remember is these, I think I mentioned it sometimes in the classes, like these terms gyan and vgyan, just in the sense of one way that they're sometimes defined, or I heard Guru Maharaj speak about them, like sometimes theory and realization, or, you know, like theory of a thing, yeah, and then tangible experience of it. So when we're speaking about Krishna consciousness, we're dealing with, you know, both. One is, gyan is potential, and vgyan is what's the word, kinetic. Like in science you have potential energy, so it's like a piece of wood has the potential for fire, but it's not on fire. And then kinetic is when you actually light it on fire, and then that potential turns into fire. So gyan and vgyan are like that. Gyan is theory, and vgyan is when it becomes kinetic, when that theory becomes realized. And so there's an importance in Krishna consciousness to remember that distinction, because gyan by itself becomes its own world, and it can go in many different directions. And so when there's discussions of like, is the Murti, you know, real or not real or something, it's like the importance of what is real on its own. Krishna is already real, the soul is already real. The truths of Krishna consciousness are already eternal, so we don't have to worry about protecting them. They're gonna be fine. Where all the vulnerability is in our perception, or our ability to rise up to or come in touch with that reality and live in that reality. That's where all the vulnerability is. So the discussion of Krishna consciousness is combining eternal truths with variables. and so all these, like these verses, to see the deity like this, or to see the sadhu like this, or to see caste like this, these are all addressing the vulnerable part of the equation. The truth of the matter is already going to exist regardless, whether or not it's perceived by people. And the people that perceive it, they're going to perceive it forever. They're also not worried. But they're worried about the people that can't perceive it, that are suffering an illusion. So the topic of Krishna consciousness is invulnerable, infallible, but there's a fallibility in how accurately it can be communicated. And so that's always an area of care and consideration. You don't just want the theory to stand tall, because that will stand tall regardless. But you somehow want it to become kinetic. You want it to become realized or tangible. And so you have to take into consideration all the things that are going to interfere with that, and all the ways that it can go wrong. And then bring awareness to all those things so that it can go right. Something like that.
Is it okay if I interject real quick here?
Please.
Yeah, I wrote a question in the chat a little bit ago, and we're still basically on the same topic, so I'll just read the question. I wrote, I've heard it said that everything is consciousness, yet that the material energy is also dead matter. So how can those two ideas be reconciled? And then also, if all is the energy of Krishna, even the material, then isn't whether something is mundane or spiritual dependent upon the vision of the perceiver. So I feel like that kind of relates here, but I kind of feel like it would be helpful if we can talk about what it really means, like what the material energy really is, and like what does it mean to be mundane, and like this concept of dead matter if everything actually is coming from consciousness. So if either anyone could talk on that, that would be helpful.
I was actually just sort of kind of on the lines of thought just now in my mind, thinking about this, particularly in relation to the second verse of these two, Archie. This is essentially, so you come from the first, and I mentioned earlier how, one of the reactions to this would be, well, then we reject all graven images. The other would be, okay, well, everything is conscious then, in a sense. I remember once having a conversation with someone years ago, talking about, today being a special day, and he was a spiritualist, and said, well, every day is special. Every day special, or if you see everything as conscious, well, then everything is spirit. Everything is, why particularly this thing being more special than why this mantra being the Maha Mantra, why Vishnu being the supreme? Why not just everything is beautifully spiritual? If you have that kind of vision, there's something interesting there, and it's difficult. It's like, it's not rational either. You can't. It's difficult. It's. I think it's the point. The transition from, I guess, being a spiritualist in generic terms to being a bhakta. The specificity and particularity of, which I guess is the preconditions for there being devotion in the first place.
Gradations, right? So there could be gradations of in terms of like, yes, everything is coming from like the spiritual, however there is like maybe more concentrated potency, it's less diluted, less mixed, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's Guru Maharaj. If you read Subjective Evolution, that's one of the things that he addresses in different ways, and the gradation is important. And he talks about that. He said the rishis saw everything as spiritual, but then we also can question, why are the people who we hear see everything as spiritual telling us so much about the mundane? That's something to be unpacked. And it means that when people see things as spiritual, they also see the contrast between seeing things as spiritual and those who don't. And they're in a position to see that better than anyone else. So they're the ones that go to educate people about what mundane nature is, what mundane mentality is, what mundane desires are. And but yeah, I mean, I don't know, that's kind of a big topic. I don't know if I could cover that, but just to that point of, I mean, what I'm remembering from Subjective Evolution is a section Guru Maharaj talks about achintya shakti, and he talks about these divisions, that one verse, 3 divisions of the Lord's energy is his supreme potency, the jiva, and then the maya potency. And then Guru Maharaj goes into further detail and he says, actually, these divisions are for us because we're jivas and we're limited. These different potencies or these different planes, they're designated. We can't change that. We can't go outside of the scope of what our potency is designated to do. But from Krishna's point of view, those distinctions are not the same. From his point of view, it's achintya shakti. It's all his potency, and where those limitations are is very different because it's all his inconceivable potency. The mundane, the spirit, it's all his artwork. So it's a different type of equation. For him, there is no mundane. There's nothing mundane. And so, but for us, there is mundane. So that distinction, and again, both those truths will be discussed, and they're both valid. Everything is spiritual. Everything is wondrous. Every day is wondrous. Those are all beautiful truths. At the same time, mundane suffering, it's complicated. There's a lot of things to juggle, and that's why the Vedas become a jungle. But we would say Vaishnavacharyas, if you go to the source, Vyasadeva, who gave it all in the first place, he actually had a system, a gradation to organize it. It wasn't a madhouse in its original state. And so, you know, all those truths can be appreciated, but there's always improper perspective and gradation. This is the thing that Guru Maharaj, I would say, adds to those discussions.
Thank you. I was thinking maybe something about how we often hear the material energy being referred to as like the shadow or reflection. And maybe it's when we're talking about, you know, something being mundane or like dead matter and everything like that, maybe because it's for the jiva to help guide them to know, you know, how to not get further entangled in Maya. It's kind of like, you know, the signpost saying, this will not lead you back to Godhead. Like, this is not the direction you want to be going in, even though, yes, it is the Lord's energy, you know, it's not the path if what you truly desire is this loving service relationship with Krishna.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely that's a very wide, like, what is Maya? What is Maya? So many negative contexts we hear, but then in Vaishnavism, we also hear positive context. She's a servant of the Lord. She's the mirror or shadow of the internal potency, Yoga Maya. So again, that context, in what context are there positive this understanding, and what context, what's being negative that's being like pointed to? And I mean, one way I understand that, or just what I've heard, like the internal potency, Yoga Maya, her primary expressed goal is to facilitate the pastimes of Krishna and the increasing rasa between his devotees. That's her expressed direct goal. And everyone that's under her shelter guidance, they're all on board with that. And then you have the Maya, or the external potency, and that facilitates or houses the inmates. You know, these are different analogies we hear, but the separate interest jivas or illusion, whatever. And so then it's like, oh, she's punishing. But then we hear, actually, no, she's actually just shadowing the same purpose of Yoga Maya. Yoga Maya is facilitating the Lord's pastimes, and Mahamaya also facilitating the Lord's pastimes, just a different kind. And she actually has no vindictiveness against the jivas, but she facilitates their misuse of their own free will. So she gets a bad rap. but in principle, her only purpose actually is to facilitate the pastimes of the Lord the same way Yoga Maya. So there's layers of understanding or appreciation for what Maya is and isn't, and it transitions from blaming this energy called Maya to asking ourselves, what role did I have to play in this?
Yeah, so then context there also can be referred to as angle of vision. If you have the angle of vision where you see all in connection with Krishna, then you see Maya as the eternal servant, and all servants of Krishna are worshipable. But if we don't see everything in connection to Krishna, then we see Maya as this like punitive, vindictive witch who's enslaving us.
Right. And again, that's just another example. Like, those are various ways that we can transpose things and get in trouble. Like, oh, anyway, I don't know. I don't want to just make up a bunch of examples, but it's just another area of like, I heard this here, and then just based on what I want to hear, I just reshuffle the deck. And so that's, you know, again, comes back to hearing repeatedly from higher sources that have more stable sensibilities about spiritual truth, so that we can keep ourselves in, you know, in the proper angle of vision or striving.
We've had some very lively discussion today. We're very grateful to Nrsingha and Lalita Madhav Prabhus in particular for their wonderful comments. I wanted to I was trying to find just now, there's a place in Revealed Truth where Gurudev touches upon this and how, because it's a fine discussion, actually, this point about matter and consciousness. And there's a place where Gurudev mentions how Srila Sridhar Maharaj should actually debate this point with his godbrother sometimes. I'm just, Lalita's nodding his head, you remember. I'm trying to find, there's a place in Revealed Truth where Gurudev mentioned.
Wasn't it was it with Jajava Maharaj? And then
yeah.
He would be more of a rationalist, and Guru Maharaj was sort of more of a
Can you remember? Can you say more exactly what the discussion?
I don't know. I've encountered it in a few places. I think I came across that prior to seeing it in Revealed Truth. I think I might have seen it maybe even in something like one of the I have no idea. I know one of the the dignity of the divine servitors or the divine servitor or somewhere like that. I might have seen it as well, or maybe I don't know, one of those, one of the books of Gurudev, obviously. I don't know, but yeah. And
I remember Madhusudana Maharaj mentioned how he'd witnessed it once and how Jajara Maharaj like challenged Srila Sridhar Maharaj, like, then is this Tripadi conscious?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You heard that, like something like that,
Yeah, exactly. It's what was Guru Maharaj's response to that?
Yes. As I recall, he was always quite adamant.
Or isn't there like somewhere even where like Gurudev talks about living stone? So there's like the living stone is like a marble, and he went to see a marble or something like that, and there's there's one living stone or dead stone or something. Even the stone is, there's movement within stone, something like that. Was that part of that conversation?
Yeah, that I remember. No, that's a separate
thing.
Well, maybe I mean they are related. Maybe it's in that same section, but that part, Srila Gurudev was referring to the different levels of consciousness that Bhaktivinoda Thakur discusses.
Oh yeah.
Mukulita Chaitan, Sankuchita Chaitan, Vikashita, these 5 different degrees of awakened consciousness, and how Gurudev was very impressed when he went to purchase some stone. I think it was for building the centenary building. And the builders, they made a distinction between living stone and dead stone. And I think the living stone was more expensive. And Gurudev was astonished because he thought, like, in the Vedas, like this is discussed, but these like simple workers, they have some distinction like this,
This quote that was just posted in the chat by Govinda, this thing from Subjective Evolution of Consciousness, that therefore in the ancient scriptures we find that the great sages and rishis are always addressing everything within this world as a person. This is like, either it's prefaced by or is contained within a broader sort of like discussion about the concept of chid-buddhir, which I think we might find maybe in Krishna Samhita, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's text. I think at the in the conclusion of that concept's introduced. But like when consciousness meets matter, there's a sort of intermediary stage, which is like shadow stage, like like hazy consciousness. Do you remember that, Vishaka?
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Sorry, the reason I bring it is I've read that quite a few times, and I can never quite work out what it is though. So it's an interesting concept, but like how it directly maps out onto what's going on in the Vedas and the personalities of the Vedas, etc. So what is Guru Maharaj saying that like the personalities or of the demigods, etc., are forms of chid-buddhir? I mean, is that what he's saying?
I can't. I've never really understood that.
I mean, again, I think my big thing that I preach on now on every topic is context. Is like whatever the topic is, don't freak out. Just remember context. There's always context.
For sure.
I mean, I think. I mean, I'm just shooting from the hip, so. Cover your ears if you don't want speculation, but I think, one, if I'm vaguely remember, it's been a long time since I read Subjective Evolution, but it's like the idea of chid-buddhir. again, it's a word that I think gets used across different contexts sometimes, like sometimes in a technical sense, sometimes in a very general sense. I don't know what that technical, I guess that's kind of the question, is like, what is the technical sense of that word? And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't point to any place where that's given in like a verse or something, but my impression of it is that it's like when you're looking at a very technical analysis in like Sankhya yoga or Sankhya, I don't know how to pronounce that properly, but like where you count the elements, then it's like things are given very technical designations. Like the false ego is this, it has these properties, it performs these functions, the intelligence. And so the soul, if you read the description, it's like the soul, there's this hard line, it's a very peculiar, it's the Tatastha Shakti mystery. It's like, if you have a bubble of air in water, is that bubble of air wet or dry? It's how do you define that? And so it's like the soul is a spiritual unit in mundane ingredients. So by one hard line analysis, they never mix. It's like they're two categorically different energies. But then the question, or like, well, then like Krishna also says that sometimes in different places. He's like, the jiva actually, like sometimes, I mean, I can't quote it, but it's almost the effect of like, the jiva doesn't actually suffer because the soul can't be cut, can't be, like the jiva technically doesn't suffer. But then we think, how do you explain all these sufferings? And so then the necessity of some category to define that layer, that what happens when the jiva energy mixes with the mundane energy. The mundane energy takes on a spiritual apparent nature, and the soul energy takes on an apparent mundane nature. It's like, so
yeah, but then okay, so that's fine as a general concept. And by the way, I'm not trying to challenge what Guru Maharaj is saying here. Obviously, I'm just trying to I've just always, it's a slightly brief discussion. But I think as far as I remember, it just come to me that like that it takes place in the context of his discussion about how someone had once, one of the disciples of Saraswati Thakur had once come up to sort of almost ridiculed the notion or the presentation of the Bhagavatam that Rahu, that what is an eclipse? It's Rahu swallowing or eating the moon, or the moon or the sun, whatever, the sun, sorry, the sun, the sun. And he's trying to, but Guru Maharaj responds to that, but that it's important to not simply dismiss the words of Bhagavatam. Actually, we need to do them justice in some ways. So that was his attempt to provide some kind of, more philosophical vision of what he's talking about there. But then, okay, fine. But then you're talking about jiva coming into contact with matter. Well, that's like all of us then. So there's all of us represent some form of chid-abhas. Fine. But in relation to the accounts of, Puranic accounts of demigods and, cosmic forces and stuff, how does that, I was just wondering how that specifically, what specific relevance does it have in that context, in understanding? Because of course, spirit comes into contact with matter. There's always going to be a point of meeting between the two, and you can call that hazy consciousness. Yeah, so if there's a pure consciousness comes into contact with non-consciousness, there'll be an intermediary position. That's just logical. But like what specific relationship that has with, sorry, we're maybe now just completely digressing, and I should probably
actually,
I can ask this outside of this context. Sorry. Sorry, it was 7:40 already.
No, I mean, if you have time, let's keep going. I'm happy to keep listening.
Yeah, no, it's just a question really. Like it's just I took the opportunity to try to understand it more, because it's something that I've always kind of like read and, well, okay, that's great, but like, how does it, like, what relevance does it have here in understanding what's going on in the plane of cosmic forces? And understanding the Bhagavatam's account of cosmic forces as living personalities, as demigods. Shadow has personality in the form of like Rahu swallowing the sun,
Nrsingha, and I just want to put this into the topic because this is just so relevant to me. And then you guys can continue on, but isn't it expressed in Brahma Samhita about the something about this idea of as Mahavishnu creating all of these universes, right? Whom is, we all always know who is giving service to the Lord is his Shakti. So she's, I think, referenced as Rama. I could be wrong, but it's not Rama, it's Rama. And it's her shadow, right? It's her shadow that is having the glance of the Lord. In other words, he's recognizing her indirectly, and that indirect reference is, initiated or is by this kind of concept of Shambhu.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so I'm just throwing that out there, and then you guys continue on. So
Well,
that's what I remember.
One thing I think, and I don't know how closely this will relate, but just on the topic when you're discussing it, and I'm curious because it's like you're referencing a specific, it seems like either, I don't know, I feel like the context, I want it like where that specific use of chid-buddhir in relation to the Rahu, because I forget that, but I think the way I understand just in general what Guru Maharaj is describing broadly in subjective evolution, the idea of the rishis seeing everything as spiritual and all that, is that it's like, there's in a sense, I remember reading Subjective Evolution and feeling at one point, like halfway through, just stunned. Like I had actually been in an optical illusion my whole life where I had been seeing the world upside down. And for the first time, someone just like sat me right side up. And I was like, just stunned. I had to stop reading. But when Guru Maharaj was talking about conscious, the idea of father fossilism, and how, from an evolutionary standpoint, there's basically a baked-in assumption that nothing existed first, and then from nothing, a little bit more of nothing added up to a little bit of something, which kept going, and something. And so Guru Maharaj said, among different points, he's like, why is that even a scientific assumption? Like, I'm not even going to give you that starting point. Why are we agreeing that nothing was the basis? And and he said another alternative explanation is that consciousness is the basis. And if we look at life and observe and apply all the same scientific metrics of, scientific method and observation, nothing disproves that consciousness is present at every stage of existence. There's no scientific thing which has ever disproved that. In fact, you can't even have this discussion without being conscious in the first place. So anyway, that's, it's an abstract philosophical point, but it becomes more tangible when we think universal forces like wind, shadow, rain. If nothing is potentially a basis, then the idea to jump from a universal force, which is just a perceivable phenomenon that came from nothing, to jump to the idea that there's a personality behind it, just sounds like voodoo. It sounds like craziness. But if you stay very technical and scientific in your research and don't rule out that consciousness may be the basis, and then you think, how could a shadow or a wind or anything exist unless consciousness first thought of it? Like, they not only is it like, is there personality or not behind it? It's like, there has to be personality behind it. Like, if consciousness is the basis, there was personality behind everything that's ever transpired. And so if that isn't ruled out as an assumption, then the question, another point Guru Maharaj adds onto there is if consciousness is the basis, is like the idea of a potent source. Is an omnipotent source more likely to create things, or something that has no potency more likely to create things? So it's like, if you start with the at least, what's the word I'm looking for, like agnostic stance, that consciousness may be the basis. That's one of the scientific angles of research we have to remain open to. I'm not even claiming it. I'm just being professional and impartial and we can't rule it out. Then it's like, but it along that line of research, then the assumption that there's a personality behind something isn't that crazy. And then the assumption that the personality behind that thing is a potent personality as opposed to an impotent personality also makes sense. You see what I'm saying? Is that?
Yeah. No. Yeah, that's very.
And so I think it's just like, so Guru Maharaj goes on to say, this whole world of factual, quantifiable, empirical sciences that we trust, if you stay true to the original scientific standards of the Vedas, then, sorry, I lost that point. The idea that this world of tangible experience is occurring out of random phenomenon or chaotic atoms or chance or whatever, like from a scientific point of view, if there's no consciousness at the basis, that's a respectable, reasonable theory. But if you are maintaining cross-referencing with Vedic science, then that's just madness. Like the idea that a conscious source created things and then everything is going on here in this tangible world of hard facts without any design behind it, it's like, it doesn't add up. So I just, in general, I don't know if I'm even getting to the point here, but Guru Maharaj just saying, like, the world of technical science, we are not compelled to eagerly divorce everything in the Vedas because science is claiming this, that, and the other. There's scientific arguments from the Vedas that can put their science in context. And the idea of chid-buddhir, just in general, the idea of hypnotism, the entire world of your hard physical facts, if you ultimately dig into spiritual analysis, you have to entertain the possibility that this is a world of hypnotism. As hard and real as it is to you, it's malleable in the hands of a higher conscious being. And if that is a respectable thought, then what we see here as chid-buddhir is, it in one sense, it means it's claymation, it's Photoshop. Krishna can animate and adjust this world completely as he sees fit. So whatever reality you think you're dealing with, remember that this is a shadow of the conscious world, something like that. And I think that, sorry, anyway, please. I don't know if I got to the point or if I danced around.
No, I think you made it in a number of different ways, but it was fairly clear. I was just going to say, on a tangential sort of side note, did anyone else catch in revealed truth on the subject of evolution and subjective evolution, etc., that Gurudev says in quite a radical, in the context of our movement, that we can accept that some people may evolve from lower species. So he accepts that Darwinian evolution may actually apply to a certain degree. Did anyone catch that?
No, there's a video. There's a video Gurudev speaking at one of these big colleges in like Berkeley or so. It's a thing. It's also in the books. And the girl asked this question about directly, how do you relate Darwinian evolution to, or anyway, it's about that. And Gurudev says we also have our own understanding of evolution. It's subjective evolution. And what Darwin discusses that this species can adjust, he said we don't have any issues with that. We're not, that's not an argument against what we're saying. What we're saying is that all of that is a byproduct of a subjective world that has, there's evolution of consciousness, which is at the forefront, and the evolution of matter is mirroring that. And
yeah. Which is, I think, exactly the fundamental. Sorry, now we're getting really sidetracked. You can have this conversation at a time.
I mean, sidetracked or right tracked. I don't know what else. But anyway, I mean, we can talk any time, but it's good. These are the discussions. Guru Maharaj says the rest of the world will think we're mad, and we think they're mad. So
yeah. But no, okay, I'll just make a final point. I was just going to say, in terms of you know, you were talking about hypnotism, this whole thing of hypnotism. I mean, if it is hypnotism, which we accept it is, then I mean, why do we have such a problem? Why do we with something like the evolution of, you know, of species, for instance? I mean, because could that not be one of the scenarios in which Krishna hypnotizes the world? It doesn't really have anything.
No, I think what's important, and this is something that I just experienced like early when I was trying to distribute books back in the day, and this kind is like, I would encounter all these arguments, and it's like theist versus atheist, and I felt like I was like grandfathered into defending quote unquote theism against atheism. And as I'm arguing with these people, and I'm just young and caught up, and I'm like, what are these all like? This is what we're talking about is science versus a sect of Christianity. That's where these arguments primarily came from. and that's its own thing. Like, I'm not here representing either of them. So how either
what did you mean? What did you mean by grandfathered? I haven't heard that expression before.
Oh, I don't know. They grandfathered in is like, I don't know if that's a normal way to use it, but like I hear it all the time in like deals. If you subscribe to a company that charges you a certain price each month, and then later they raise their price, they don't raise your price because you're grandfathered in. Means you inherited, I don't know, something like that. Maybe it's a weird, but I guess what I'm going to say is like, I inherited the Christian side of the argument against atheism unknowingly, and when I stepped back more, I was like, I'm not actually like the evolution and it, like the idea of evolution of species. These aren't art. This isn't like the Vedas. Like Vyasadeva argued against Mayavad. He argued against demigod. Where like he had his own arguments. Like the idea that species can evolve wasn't one of them. So it's like
but it's not just a small sect of or a sect of Christianity, but it's but it has definitely represents a fairly vocal, quarters within even.
Well, actually, I don't know if I might have said small, just being impassioned.
Well, no. But what I mean is, it's a hill that a lot of Hare Krishnas, quote unquote, are willing to die on as well.
No, I know. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, in a sense, just because of language, really, it's like if everyone was bilingual and knew all languages, you could just quote Vedic verses and discuss Krishna consciousness. But because you're saying God, you're saying religion, it's triggering all the other ideas of all those, and just Christianity is a predominant influence. And and I'm not like even arguing against. I'm just saying like it was meaningful to me to realize like specifically I want to know what is the perspective of the Vedas and the Vaishnavas, and then where anything else under the name of theism or atheism or anything lines up to that. That's a discussion that's very welcome to be had, but I don't want to have that discussion while I'm like half picking up other people's ideas. You know what I'm saying? It's just, and it's not pro or anti anyone, but it's like if quote unquote atheists are like, we believe in this, I'm like, yeah, I mean, on that point, that's reasonable. Vedas also tell you to try to live like that. I'm not going to argue with you on that. It's not like the label of what someone claims to be doesn't determine everything. It's like, how do you view the world? That's ultimately the issue. And Vedas also very cool about the Vedas. They're very accommodating. They don't require people to be like expressly theistic in the sense of like personal God. Like Vedas encourage karma kanda on one level. That's not even a theistic necessarily. Like you don't have to be a theist. It's just like do good work. It's like Vedas are trying to connect people at different levels of receptivity at some point and gradually introduce spiritual understanding bit by bit. So theist and atheist is not like the black and white argument of the Vedas. It's like, are you receptive to advice about diminishing your exploitive behavior or not? That's an important point. Whether you consider yourself theistic or not, are you receptive to that? Because if you are, you can begin a process that may cleanse your heart a bit, and then matters of theism, you'll see them totally differently. So it's like theist and atheist isn't really the argument. The argument is knowledge and ignorance. There's tons of ignorance in the world of theism. There's tons of ignorance in the world of materialism. So it's like, is the perspective healthy for your soul? And at what degree is a person receptive to that? That's like the main track. And theism, evolution, all those things are all, you know, like points along that path maybe. But I feel like sort of inheriting the hostility of the quote unquote theist against the atheist, and like that felt misleading to me after. Like after I like went down that road, I'm like, wait a minute, these aren't even, what am I arguing against and what am I arguing for? I want to hear the science of Vaishnavism, and then I'll know where I stand on these issues.
Yeah. I mean, same could be said about whether the Earth is flat or not. No, sorry.
What was that? I missed that. What you said?
No, don't open that kind of word.
I won't go. I'm just curious. Like, I gotta know what you said.
The Wednesday meeting was going strong, and then somebody
He made a joke about the flat Earth. Can I chime in a tiny little thing?
Go downhill.
Yeah.
I'll give you my flat Earth. And
no. There was jaḍe wanted to say something.
This is something that was inspired way back, but it's relevant because there's this underlying theme in God. I have a really hard time voicing all these complex realizations that I get from your glorious company, all of you, for sure. But the theme that consciousness what's the word I'm looking for? Like matter, it's coming from consciousness, and the Rahu and Sun. I'm astrologer. Sorry, I apologize. I apologize, but I'm like way deep astrologer. Couple things I wanted to say. In the Śrīmad-Bhagavatam, the entire Vedic astrology in all its detail is encoded in the Sanskrit, like all the nuances and details. And Vedic astrology and medieval astrology, and astrology the way I practice it, the planets are actually seen as dimensions of consciousness that also have a material form in our reductionist scientific world. So Saturn is that, ball of whatever it is with the rings around it. But from the Vedic worldview astrology and the medieval astrology worldview, Saturn is also a plane of consciousness. And that's merely the body of that plane of consciousness, the material waste product of that plane of consciousness, if you will. And so I was kind of seeing this underlying, very nice unifying theme throughout all of these discussions, is that there's a living world, and that what the atheists or the materialists or the reductionists, what they're calling reality is merely the densest dimension of that living world, right? This is all basic stuff. But I just wanted to chime in defense of Rahu and the Sun, that the Sun isn't just a ball of gas and Rahu isn't just a hypothetical point of the moon's ellipse around the Earth, but that those things are manifestations of consciousness itself, and a specific personality, each one a specific personality and dimension of consciousness. So I just thought that was relevant to the central discussion of consciousness proceeding matter. Thanks for letting me share.
That was great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
What thing I'll add really quick, sorry, and I hope I'm quick, that and I forgot. Oh my gosh, sorry.
We should start finding things up.
You always got to be a little cautious when Nrsingha says, "Hey, one thing I got to say real quick."
And you know what? I forgot, so maybe it's all for the better.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, I do remember, and it is quick. So the same way that scientists are very excited to quantify this world, like, oh, you can measure gravity, you can measure what's the word, terminal velocity. If you drop a piano or a piece of paper from outer space, gravity can only, it's like once you can quantify something that it's going to perform consistently in this way, people of a scientific mind become interested. Once I can quantify it, I can study it, I can understand its relationship to other things that are quantifiable. So I think it's important to think of Vedic rishis as scientists. It's that they were in the same scientific brain that Neil deGrasse Tyson or someone has, is very entertaining, that can just look at the quantifiable world of matter in a million ways and show you a bunch of subtle things that you weren't aware of. That's what rishis were doing, but they had access to more information. They just had access to perception of subtle planes. And that's why it becomes very sensitive, is because people claim that, and it's voodoo, and it's weird, and it's crazy, and there's all kinds of psycho stuff. But just imagine if Neil deGrasse Tyson or any other empirical scientist could have perception or belief that there's a quantifiable world of subtle things that my senses can't experience. It would revolutionize their life. That same scientific brain would want to understand, how do I get the accurate quantifications of these subtle worlds so that my assessments are more informed? And that's what rishis are. And that's why there's a lot of importance given to revelate to the context of revelation by realized people, because it's giving you, in a sense, hard quote unquote hard data about subtle truths. And
that's kind of interesting though, because I mean, that's one way of, yeah, I guess I've always thought of rishis more as the opposite of that, actually, as maybe more like conveying, not to make this sound like I'm just imaginary, but you know, there's like mathematizable truth, quantifiable truth, hard truth, repeated, objective, and then there's like the truth of like poetry. When you read a deep, beautiful poem, is that less true than something mathematizable?
Well, I think it's
truths about human beings and about life.
Well, I think it's yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, we see both. We see very technical. I mean, even, you know, look at the discussion between Mahaprabhu and Sanatana Goswami. Mahaprabhu, Sanatana Shiksha, Mahaprabhu began very technical. The different avatar, it's super scientific. And then by the end, he just totally segues into Krishna Lila. And at the end of it, he says, this isn't what I meant to tell you. He said, I was telling you the science, and then the world of rasa took over. And
yeah,
that was Krishna wanting to give you something. I don't even know if I tasted that. And so both realities are there. There's the world of rasa and free spirit and expression and unlimited possibility and creativity. And then there's, at the same time, it's like if you have a video game, it's a very enchanting world, but behind the scenes, you have the programming. It's like ones and zeros and all kinds of.
But so it's only a framework. I mean, it's only a framework to sort of like contain.
Absolutely. And ultimately, it's meant to serve that higher one.
The rasa, you know, the poetic, and devoid of that, it has no meaning at all, actually.
But I would say that there's a codependency. It comes back to the point of how to communicate Krishna consciousness properly in a vulnerable plane where it can be misunderstood. And so rasa is the goal, but if you just present that, people are gonna spin out because they don't have
certainly
context. And so when conveying Krishna consciousness, the scientific side is there to protect it. That's why a lot of these analyses, they in a sense they function as part of, not to say gyan, but they deal with issues of detachment and seeing the world of illusion properly and maintaining that. And a lot of those analyses are like, they're sobering, and they aren't the goal, but they're meant to protect the person's perspective on what the supernatural, free-spirited plane is, so that they, you see what I'm saying? Like,
for sure. Well, I guess it's like in the Bhagavatam, you have the Dasha Lakshana. The whole thing is like Ashraya Krishna, but then all the you know, the Vamshanu Charit, etc., all the things that are supportive of the ultimate thing, but remove that thing, and ultimately they have no meaning, but they're somehow a necessary container for it. But I'm just thinking in terms of, to make this a bit more like, taking the Bhagavatam, for instance, as like on the same level as a science textbook, and reading them side by side, as in like they're giving the same kind, they're trying to do the same thing, give accounts of the world in the same way, that would be to impose foreign concerns onto the Bhagavatam.
Sure. And that was like an analogy more. I was speaking more in terms of like the idea that subtle truth should be dealt with as reliable truths, as the same way we deal with mundane ones. That was sort of the spirit behind it. And someone that's sensitive to that, like Guru Maharaj, they become very quote unquote scientific in the sense that the world of subtle reality is not imaginary to them. They're not interested in imagination. It's a very specific sensibility that's important, because if I'm not bound to the physical world, then anything goes. There's plenty of them in the world, but to find the people that are like, I'm not bound to the physical, but I'm very concerned with understanding what the subtle is in actuality, they approach that in a scientific manner. And that's sort of just the spirit of what I was trying to say. Like, you know,
I suggest that we take this.
Yeah.
I would suggest. I'm just observing. Vishaka is starting to look a little bored. we should do that phone call, Nrsingha Prabhu. We should do that phone call finally, and we should take this conversation.
Or start a separate Zoom meeting that's like a summit.
I'm sorry. No, I was actually, my internet's so bad today. I'm dropping in and out, and also this conversation's a little over my head. So no, it's fine. Actually, I wanted to go back. This is the kind of thing I want to go back to and listen to. So I feel like I'm collecting material right now. And later on, I'll go back and listen to it again.
I really will end on this because I got to do something. But like another thing, when you get to the idea of, I would say, I don't want to use the word scientific, but like when you deal with the idea of like information that is substantial enough that you can make eliminations based on it, you can rule things out. That these factors are stable enough that things that contradict these factors are not tenable, and that level of confidence in the perspective of what the scriptures are trying to reveal is important. Like, I don't call it science, but it's like, you know, there was an instance in ISKCON where some things were going on, some problems, and some leader was having problems, and this leader was friendly with Guru Maharaj, faithful to him, and someone that Guru Maharaj liked. And some godbrother of that person went to Guru Maharaj and expressed concern and said, you know, they're kind of going wild, they're kind of going off the rails. And Guru Maharaj was sympathetic. He was he's like, no, but I trust that person. They're sincere. They can learn from their mistakes and And then the person said, oh, and now they're claiming bhava or something. And then Guru Maharaj was like, that's impossible. Like, bring him here and I will take out the scriptures and I will show him all the qualifying stages before that so that he can understand that that's not what he's experiencing. and so Guru Maharaj was a well-wisher of that person. He wasn't against him in any way, but he also knew that being a well-wisher of him means keeping the content and context of Krishna consciousness in its proper perspective. And so being a well-wisher means I have to ground this person in a proper estimation of where they are. And anyway, I guess, I don't know why it's science related, but I guess what I mean to say is, like, there's certain types of perspective of subtle things. And if we, you know, experience them, trust them, cultivate them, practice them, are able to have experiences in our life that enable us to believe in them more and more, then it gives some, it's a subtle world that can't be quantified per se by the senses, but by faith, there's some quantifiable understanding where it's like, if someone, you know, like, you know, we see in the name of spirituality, someone claims to be God or it's like those things aren't persuasive. It's like we've come in touch with representations of spiritual truth that just resonate at a much more substantial level. So even though you can't physically measure anything in that interaction with the ruler, there's a very tangible standard of perspective or experience which informs us that certain things are not, you know, substantial or on the same level as what our gurus present. And anyway, I'm officially stopped.
Wait, I have one more inspiration, just an idea I just thought of. Sripad Bhakti Vimala Avadhuta Maharaj wants me to do a podcast. He keeps saying, be like Joe Rogan, which I'm not really a Joe, I'm more like a Russell Brand maybe or something, but like, he wants me to do a spiritual podcast. He said this 3 times, every time I see, and have a variety of guests come and present. And I ask like maybe questions or we engage in a dialogue. So would either or both of you want to be maybe some of the first guests in that? Because you're both really brilliant, and a lot of what you have to say could be really inspiring for a larger collective. But we could go on for a long time like this if you want. So consider it, please consider it, you know.
Okay, sure. Yeah. That sounds interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, listening to this, I was thinking that this kind of discussion, it really suits a podcast. So yeah, it would be brilliant if you had Lalita, Madhav, and Nrsingha there for sure.
I have all the equipment, so you can call in, we can record it, live stream it, all of it. I'm all set up. I just haven't gotten the guests yet.
Oh wow, yeah. That's really cool. That's really cool. I think that's really, yeah.
I follow Lalita Madhav. He is. I'm vocal amongst friends, people I'm familiar with. As soon as I go outside of that, I start to like.
Yeah.
Although I am getting over it, which is unfortunate because then I don't know when I'll ever be quiet. But that's.
Okay, well, maybe we'll wrap things up there. It's been an awesome meeting, and maybe we can request Govinda and Dini to prepare this one to go public. I think other devotees would. I for one want to go back and listen again. So anyway, Dandavat pranams to all of you. Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.